Burlington, Washington, a place where parents promised their children. Nothing bad happens here. Ted Bundy wasn't a warning to Burlington. He was a hometown success story, until the world learned the truth. Burlington was a town that appeared to be carved from a storybook. Nestled between the gentle slopes of the Cascade Mountains, it was a place where every face was familiar, every street corner known, and the air itself seemed to hum with quiet contentment. The houses stood like neat rows of postcards, and the town's single diner served coffee as thick as the morning fog that rolled in from the lake. It was a town where everyone knew everyone, and nothing seemed out of place. But beneath its veneer of serenity, there was an undercurrent of unease. Detective Maria Shaw had always thought of Burlington as quaint, maybe even a little too perfect. She had arrived as the new investigator, recently relocated from the big city. The locals greeted her with warm smiles, but there was something about them, something in the way they spoke in half-whispers when they thought no one was listening, that made her wonder just how much they weren't telling her. Her first case in the town wasn't one she had expected. It was the case of a man who, for years, had carried the town's admiration like a heavy mantle, the Ted Bundy case. To the world, he was a name associated with evil. But to Burlington's residents, he was something far different, a cousin, a nephew, a family member who could do no wrong. Maria had heard the name before. Ted Bundy, the charming, intelligent man responsible for a series of brutal murders. But in Burlington, he was just a face in the crowd. A successful law student, a polite young man, a seemingly perfect son to his overbearing mother. Yet Maria couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't as perfect as everyone believed. For the first time, Maria wondered, what if this town wasn't safe because nothing happened, but because everything did and nobody ever talked about it? One rainy afternoon, Maria was invited by Edna Cowell Martin, Bundy's cousin, to have tea. Edna had just published a book, Dark Tide, Growing Up with Ted Bundy, detailing her relationship with the man who was now a notorious serial killer. Maria listened intently as Edna spoke, her voice soft, almost nostalgic, as she reminisced about the child she once knew. Ted was always a good boy, Edna said, her fingers trembling around the cup. He was polite, charming, smart. Everyone loved him, and, I don't know, sometimes I wonder how we missed the signs. Maria felt a cold shiver run down her spine. There was something in Edna's tone, something in the way she seemed both fond and uneasy about her cousin. The more Edna spoke, the more Maria noticed the cracks in the facade. The hesitation in Edna's voice when she mentioned Ted's temper. The way she quickly glossed over certain periods of his life, as though they were best forgotten. As they continued to talk, Maria's mind wandered back to a conversation she'd had with Elizabeth Kloepfer, Bundy's girlfriend, who had eventually become so suspicious of him that she'd begun to fear for her own life. Elizabeth had helped authorities track Bundy down, but it had come at a personal cost. I never believed it at first, Elizabeth had confessed, tears welling in her eyes. I thought it was just bad luck, or maybe a coincidence. But then I started noticing the way he would leave for days at a time, without explanation. His temper was explosive, and his eyes, there was something about his eyes that never seemed right. It was like I was looking at someone else. Maria recalled Elizabeth's words as she sat in Edna's house. That feeling of dread, that sense that something dark was hidden beneath a layer of charm, was not unique to Elizabeth. It was something Maria now felt herself, like an instinct, a whisper of danger in the air. She had heard it in Elizabeth's voice, and now she could hear it in Edna's. It was all too perfect, too smooth, too staged. Then a phone call came. Margaret Horn, a university student who had been living in Burlington for the past year, had gone missing. The search for her began immediately, but there were no signs of foul play at first. She had been walking home from the library late at night when she vanished without a trace. Maria felt the familiar weight settle in her stomach, the feeling that she was staring at the edges of something far darker than anyone realized. The more she looked into Margaret's disappearance, the more she began to notice disturbing similarities between this case and others from nearby states. Women who had vanished into thin air, their bodies later discovered. often in isolated places. The method of abduction, the brutality of the crime, it all felt familiar. It felt like a pattern. Ted Bundy had been in town recently. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a warning. Maria reviewed Bundy's history and saw the telltale signs. The manipulation, the charm, the calculated cruelty. The more she looked, the clearer it became. His crimes weren't random. They were systematic. Her mind flashed to the incident with Carol and Boone, Bundy's wife, who had been married to him while he was imprisoned. Maria remembered reading about Boone's strange defense of her husband during the trial, how she had believed in his innocence until the very end, despite the mounting evidence. And yet, there were rumors, whispers from those who had known Bundy. Stories of his anger, his manipulation, his ability to charm and deceive. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that Bundy had always been hiding something much darker than anyone had ever suspected. The investigation into Margaret Horne's disappearance intensified, and soon a pattern emerged. The symbol found on Margaret's wrist was one that Maria recognized. A symbol from an old case file, a cold case that had been buried for years. It had been linked to Ted Bundy. The exact same symbol, the same method. This was no random act. Bundy had returned, and he was picking up where he had left off. As Maria dug deeper, she began to receive cryptic letters, anonymous at first, warning her that she was getting too close to the truth. The town's whispers grew louder, and a sense of dread began to settle over Burlington. People were starting to suspect, to fear, that the person they had trusted for so long, the seemingly innocent man who had been their neighbor, their cousin, their friend, was the very monster they had been warned about. But it wasn't just the letters or the symbols that made Maria uneasy. It was the feeling that Bundy wasn't done yet. There was something unfinished about the way he operated, something that suggested this was far from over. Maria's suspicions were confirmed when Carol and Boone, now estranged from Bundy, reached out. She had begun to doubt his innocence, and her growing fear had driven her to speak out. The more Maria investigated, the more she realized that Bundy's actions weren't just a string of isolated murders. They were part of a larger, chilling narrative. A narrative that started with a quiet, innocent man who had hidden his true nature behind charm and intelligence, but who had always been driven by something darker. Maria faced Bundy in the prison for the first time. There behind bars, he was the same man, calm, composed, charming, but there was a coldness to him that was undeniable. The face of a man who had gotten away with it all. Bundy's final confession, made in a series of letters to Edna, revealed the depths of his denial, his manipulative tendencies, and his need to control the narrative. He had always wanted to be the hero in his own story, even as his victims lay forgotten, their lives taken in the most brutal of ways. The trial, which followed, captivated the nation. The revelation of Bundy's crimes shook the town to its core. No one would ever see Ted Bundy the same way again. The man they had known was a monster, and the charm that had once made him a beloved figure in Burlington had been nothing more than a mask that had finally fallen. As Bundy was sentenced to death, Maria couldn't help but reflect on the townspeople's disbelief. They had been so easily fooled by a man who had carefully crafted his own persona. The town of Burlington, once innocent and peaceful, would never be the same. The shadows of the past had returned, and though Bundy's execution would bring closure, Maria knew the scars would remain. Burlington, like Bundy, had hidden its darkness well, and even though the truth was now exposed, the town's soul would forever carry the weight of the lies it had allowed to fester for so long.